Hi folks, my name is Charles and I'm the host of Go-to-Market Hackers, the show where we go inside the minds of revenue architects, creating systems that deliver winning outcomes. So before I introduce our awesome guest today, I'll share a little bit about myself. I'm a SaaS founder with over 10 years of experience leading go-to-market teams. And what I really find fascinating is understanding how the best GTM teams are leveraging AI to accelerate their growth. And so this is what this podcast is about. It's about interviewing GTM leaders, RevOps folks, and GTM engineers that are building these awesome systems and processes internally using AI to achieve standout results. So today's guest is my friend Yuval Bresler, who's the Director of Go-to-Market Operation and Analytics at Yotpo. And Yotpo is a leader in the reputation management system that basically works with massive retailers and e-commerce brands around the world. Yuval Bresler, so good to have you on the show, my friend. Thanks for joining us. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about who you are. Who's Yuval? What's your background? How do you get into this role? And then also share a little bit more about Yotpo before we dive into all the cool things you guys are doing on the AI front.
Sounds amazing. So a little bit about myself. I've been around consulting and operations for about a decade now. I actually started off my career in Israeli Ministry of Justice, of all places. My background is in law and economics. I was the person that had to build some financial models when someone was petitioned against the state of Israel. So I had to create that financial model to see what the financial impact would be. Wow. A very interesting start of my career. Ultimately, then got my way to the US, got my master's here in New York, and then worked with BCG for quite some time as a graduate consultant. And then I had the privilege to work for Monday.com, the pre-IPO, really learn the ropes of everything, RevOps, doing kind of a bunch of roles in a company that was growing so fast. A very interesting time. And that's where I fell in love within operations, I would say. And then after spending a few years there, I had the privilege to start working for the company that I'm currently working for, Yotpo. Not a lot of people know Yotpo is probably the e-commerce leader, essentially, providing solutions for reviews products and loyalty products. And the company has been around for over a decade now. It's doing very well on those products. We had some usage products. We're mostly focusing on our core investments across reviews and loyalty, but really think about a platform that arms merchants across different platforms like Shopify to help them with retaining their customers, to acquire their customers, and really to make essentially their margins and their ability to work with their brands and with their customers much better.
Super cool. I think, as you said, people don't necessarily realize it, but you guys are powering all the reviews and the loyalty components of all these merchants across all these ecosystems like Shopify. So for sure, you've read reviews that are powered by Yotpo. Very cool. And so the reason I wanted to chat is obviously I have a lot of respect for what you've been doing, and Yotpo as a company is obviously super powerful company in the e-commerce space. And as is the tradition in this show, is really understanding how the best go-to-market teams and the best tech startups are incorporating AI into their go-to-market in order to see accelerated growth, in order to see faster workflows. And everybody has their own kind of system, their own angle. And so I thought, given that you've been doing this for a while now, I'm sure you guys are doing some super interesting things, and get a bit of a peek behind the scenes of like, what is Yotpo doing? How are you guys leveraging AI? How are you thinking about, hey, we need to start implementing AI. Where do we start? I think all that would be super helpful for the folks that are listening. So Yuval, would love to learn more.
Yeah, it's the billion-dollar question right now. I think there's not a single discussion that I'm having that doesn't involve AI. And I think just to lay the ground for this discussion, I think it's important there's a few things to think about. One, I think for the most part, for the most companies, basically in a lot of industries, we can see a lot of commoditization happening. There's a lot of startups within the space. There's money to invest right now. So I think the edge has really become the go-to-market excellence. And I think AI within this context makes a big difference, right? So your ability to reduce costs, your ability to do things more efficiently really becomes a differentiator. And AI is probably it's not everybody investing in AI, but the question is, how are you going to implement that? So I think that's a way to think about things in general. And more specifically, I think the shift is not a fundamentally technological shift. I think the table stakes are set. Everybody knows exactly how to leverage AI at this point. Nobody knows what the future would hold. But the way that I think about it is really that this is an operational challenge rather than a technical one. And our role as operational leaders, and I would imagine RevOps leaders or basically go-to-market leaders across, is how are you taking the current tech stack? How are you taking the current processes? And you're making AI working with them in a scalable way. And I think that's ultimately, it sounds simple, but that's the crux of the problem. So investing in AI is easy. Everybody's doing this. But how are you actually leveraging? How are you actually scaling it? That's the hard part. And I think this is where and you can see the statistics, by the way, coming from McKinsey, coming from market researchers, the majority of AI workflows, processes, builds are not working, or they're not maybe delivering the ROI that you've anticipated at the beginning. So I think that's the way to think about the problem. Now, after kind of laying the groundwork, basically the Yotpo specific method, but I think it's a method that's being used in a lot of different places, is to look at AI implementation through the lens of two vectors, right? So the first vector, and I think this is something maybe unique to Yotpo, but not probably other companies are using this, is to think about ownership of AI tools and AI implementation in three different categories, right? So when you think about how you implement AI through the go-to-market, there's basically three categories that you think of. One is a high code, right? So think about really building or incorporating LLMs within the systems. Usually involves product changes, product adjustments, which would involve taking LLMs or APIs, but integrating them in a much more, I would say, dev-led environment, which is a very, I would say, challenging problem for individuals within the RevOps space. The second one is low code, right? So think about building AI agents, or think about recreating the process you have internally to create more automations, whether it's data enrichment, whether it's data governance, and so on and so forth. And then the last point is no code. The no code in the world is like on those custom GPTs, right? So the PMM on the organization wants to have within a click seeing the battle cards or understanding how you stack up against a competitor. That's like something you can do very easily within ChatGPT. You don't need anyone. So when you think about those categories, basically the way that I think about it is in two ways. So who's the primary owner and what ops role within those categories becomes, right? So in the high code, when you have a team of developers, and one thing that I would say, which taking us just a little bit sidetracking, is what we've introduced at Yotpo, and I think this is really an enabler, is that within the RevOps organization, you now have a dev team, a small dev team with someone who's owning the AI, and they take on those larger projects. They will take on, we'll talk about specifically what do I think just in a second, what do I think they should own. But ops in that space is more about data provisioning, providing clear business cases, unifying the data, helping the dev teams really operate in a sense that they would be able to solve problems without having the need to go into the nitty-gritty of how processes are being built within the different toolings and systems. For the low code, I think that's where really ops is excelling, right? So that's, I would say, usually you would use tools like 8n8 or Relevance, where this is a really good tool for RevOps individual to build processes, to build automations. Really happy to share some of the examples with you as well. But this is where you take people they know the data, they know the processes, they know the business case of the company, and they can build those AI agents and workflows and automations within a tool that help them solve the heavy lifting of integrations, of building those environments in which those agents would run. And I think that really it's suitable and really the best place for ops individuals to focus on. And then low code really becomes just a problem of governance, right? So as an ops leader, as an ops manager, you need to make sure that you control the segmentation, that you're not allowing for too much of a silo or fragmentation that everybody wants to build and wants to build very fast, but you have to make sure that everybody's running in the same direction. So I think that's the first vector and an interesting way to think about it. And then the second vector is really, I think, the most classical questions in the world of tooling, which is obviously build versus buy. So the strategic choice of how to go about it. And I think if in the past we used to have buy off the shelf commodity functions, call transcripts or email summaries, you still have this and provide you with speed and simplicity. And it really solves, I would say, fondly to the FOMO of like C-level operators. But at the end, I think it doesn't hold enough value for the long term. Just A, because the AI space is shifting that much, and B, that it ultimately doesn't provide enough of a robust solution for the company.
So you're balancing short-term versus long-term, and you're saying, all right, it's true that when you buy, you can implement and go to market faster with a shiny new tool that allows you to send whatever these personalized SMS messages at scale using AI. But if we build it internally, yes, it'll take us 4 months to get there, but it'll be integrated into the different systems that we have. It'll be built with the right foundations, and then we'll be able to scale it better. Is that kind of the idea?
Yes, 100%. And I think
Okay.
when you think about build on the other end of the spectrum, right? So you can build things that exactly matching what you need, your ICP, your different processes, the way that you do things. But obviously, as we said, the cons would be it takes a lot of time. You need, at this point, a lot of expertise that you probably don't have within the ops organization, even if you have the developers. So it limits the amount of problems that you can solve. It makes the process much, much slower. At the end, it's much more robust, though, and it solves the actual problems that your companies are facing. And so I think what actually excites me is that with AI, basically there was the emergence of a new category, which is what we used to refer to as boost or extend or a hybrid version, if you may. So the AI tools provide you with the flexibility to use LLMs or to use the different processes that were already built just based on your proprietary data, and really to have them tailored into your company. So think about, and again, going back to the categories that we talked about in the first vector, this is in a way that low code, right? So you would have tools that basically solves all of the API problems that you're facing or all of the integration problems, which really involves deep code or understanding of how systems work, which usually is a skill set outside of ops organizations, but it will allow you to build everything on top of it. So this is kind of the way to think about that hybrid motion. So you're buying a software, but it's robust enough to support many of the things that you're creating and building. To me, again, and we're only at the beginning, I think that's like the right way to go. It provides you with the flexibility you need without, the 6 to 12 months work that usually involved with building something in-house. And it provides you with the flexibility on one hand, but with enough robust on the other hand. So to me, that's the best way. But I think we have to be honest here. It's more about a question of what is it that you're trying to solve, right? If it's something that uniquely for Yotpo specifically, if it's a unique problem that Yotpo is trying to solve, then obviously they're probably buying tools won't be able to provide you what you need. But if it's call prep, or if it's you want to make sure that you're following up with your leads or you're outbounding, there's probably a tool that will allow you to do this, maybe with some extension or some modifications and changes. But I think you need to understand what the problem is that you're trying to solve, and then it would help you, to understand exactly on the high code, low code, no code, and then ultimately is your buy or build. So I think if you think about that as a metrics, this is probably where you want to focus and understand how you want to solve your problems.
That makes sense. I guess one question for you as I look through the first vector, which is high code, low code, no code. I think one of the things that a lot of organizations get concerned about is that the separate teams go a little bit rogue, right? So the BDR team uses a low code or no code tool to automate a specific type of outreach, but then it pulls data from Salesforce and it duplicates it and it spits it out into HubSpot. There's just a lot of stuff that when you're automating, you can automate a lot of chaos if the engine starts running at scale. And so I guess a question regarding that is with the no code / low code, in a way, somebody who's in marketing ops or a marketer might create an N8N workflow to be able to automate a small task. Do they have full freedom to be able to experiment with these tools, launch these different automation campaigns? Do you guys have specific initiatives that you guys are focused on? Or how are the different department heads like CMO, VP sales, et cetera? How do they structure how they want to leverage AI in the best way? Or maybe that's not them. Maybe that's you. Maybe that's somebody else. I'm just curious, how do you avoid chaos with all these tools coming out and the ability through these low code and no code to be basically execute yourself a lot of these things with all the benefits as well as all the risks that it entails?
Yes. So that's a great question. And I think I would start off by saying that chaos is, to some extent, is part of what you're trying to achieve at the beginning. You want to democratize the using of AI. You want to provide tools to different people, but then it creates the problem that you just mentioned about how are you making sure that all of those negative things or what it comes with democratizing those processes, which
Right.
usually involve very sensitive processes, sensitive data, they don't occur. And I think that kind of leads to a much wider conversation on the ops mandate, basically, when it comes to leveraging AI. And I think the way to think about it is, as I think a good example would be, as developers have now become more of a test, or basically instead of writing code, now they need to make sure that the code that's being built or written by AI makes sense and does not impact any of the things that they're trying to build. I think to some extent, the mandate for ops is more tailored and focused towards governance versus what it used to be of building. Or maybe I would say that the paradigm has shifted slightly. So one of the things that we're trying to do, especially on the no code, low code, is to make sure that ops individuals set the stage to enable other individuals within the company to build their own tools or to adjust their own tools, right? So what we used to do, quote unquote, was to build the processes, right? To build the process in Salesforce, or to build the process for HubSpot or anything marketing ops. Now you would enable the teams to leverage the tools to build what they need. And you would be very close in terms of governance to make sure that they don't do anything that they shouldn't do. So the way to do it is creating red lines or rigid guidelines in terms of, this is something that, you can do. Like, these are processes you can touch. These are automations that you cannot do or augment or change. But anything that does not fall within this, by all means, you should go ahead and you should try to build and do things the way that you see fit. And we're doing workshops and we're enabling people how to leverage those tools. But ops has to be very close to the output. We need to make sure that we're not jeopardizing any of the core functions of the company, that everybody is in line and working through the same target or the same basically output that we're trying to create for the company. And so that paradigm shift from building, which of course we're building, but different things, into a more of a governance for the go-to-market to make sure that people are not doing anything that we're not intended with AI. And I think the way to accomplish this, obviously, it's a very difficult question. So the trade-off is between running fast and enabling individuals to do things with AI. And again, when you think about the new world, there's really no advantage to have RevOps individuals versus other people with leveraging AI. Just maybe the understanding how the mechanism work or how the data is being structured. And so to leverage that understanding or that skill set into just making sure that people are not doing what they shouldn't do, obviously you can create guidelines, but you need to be very close to the field and to be part of what the teams are building in order to truthfully understand how to do it. So I think that's kind of the way to look at the new ops mandate within this AI role, and how to structure the way that we're operating to enable individuals, at the same time making sure that we're not building those silos and that fragmentation.
That makes sense. It's great. It's actually great that it sounds like you're empowering your teams to be able to take initiative with AI and use these low code, no code solutions. I'm also curious. I mean, Clay claims to have coined the term go-to-market engineer. Do you even have this role or this title in your company, like a go-to-market engineer, somebody who's basically focused exclusively on building these workflows, these automations, whether it's Clay tables or N8N, as we talked about? Or is it pretty much, and I'm also asking because I do feel like the role of RevOps is shifting. Like, I'm seeing Rev folks that are becoming more technical, though there are some that are more strategic and that have engineers on their team that are just owning these tools. I'm curious how you think about that, how you think it's also evolving, and yeah, basically how you guys structure it at Yotpo.
I think that's a great segue to discussing kind of the role of ops within kind of this new emerging AI world. And I think let's break down the question, maybe start off with the last part. I think what we're seeing with ops organization in general is not only the need to have more technical skill set, but it's really going from what we've been doing for years to thinking about ourselves as more of a managing an agent fleet. So we talked about governance, but it's not only about that. Is how do you delegate the kind of the tedious work to AI agents? How are you in making sure that what the team is building outside of ops is integrating with what you're building, and how you can optimize the business, not by scaling with people, not by scaling with, we used to have those offshore teams helping us do some of the tedious tasks mostly, but it's really about anchoring the company across leveraging AI agents towards a unified goal. And I think in order to really accomplish that, you would need to have folks that maybe not necessarily they have, I would say, hard skills in terms of their knowledge, but they're geared more into how to build processes, how to build agents, understanding API, and maybe even debugging versus you used to have those more of a Google Sheet skills, right? So building models, building capacities, understanding the numbers high level, because that's essentially being solved to some extent with AI already. So I think that's the shift that the organizations are going through across different companies, and especially for Yotpo as well.
There's one word you use, which is debugging, which I completely agree. I wrote a post on marketing debugging and what it means. And really, I find that you need to love to tinker with these tools and to tinker with systems, because there is a lot of troubleshooting at the end of the day. Like an API is not going to work because the format's different and the webhook isn't working for this and that reason. And you have to, like, it takes time. Like, I've been building these systems just because I've been wanting to learn, but I could be spending 3 hours to figure out why it's not outputting exactly what I want, and being very frustrated. And I don't think I'm the type of person who can spend 10 hours obsessing about all the little, just because I'm not built that way. But I do think that the role is evolving towards that. And it's funny that you mentioned the folks that used to be working in the Excels and the data side. Yeah, I think the folks that are, used to building models and systems and those type of things, I think are a great fit. It makes sense.
I think it's interesting that you say this, because I think there's in a way, we're going back to the basics. When I, again, started off I think 7 years ago, starting off with marketing ops, we used to work with Marketo to build those webhooks, to build those enrichments. And I used to tinker for 5 hours on why this field doesn't match or what's the unique identifier. And when I said that back 100%. Then, people looked at me as if I'm crazy. This wasn't like ops, right? You need to build data models, and you need to understand what the capacity would be in 6 months. Like, it was different skill set. And I think with the emergence of AI, now you're seeing those skill sets now become back center stage in a point. And it's interesting also to think about the different questions that you would ask in interviews, right? So, for example, one of the things that you would like to ask now for someone who wants to join like RevOps is, okay, tell me about a side project that you built in 810, right? You want, and you touched upon me, like personally, I have to do this, or I don't like to do this, but thinking about like a home project that someone built, right? With their inline, and then that's how you can say, okay, they're the kind of person who built workflows, who would know what's broken and will sit and actually build those things. So I think you can see evolving tech stack or evolving skill set, in a sense, is really something that's happening all the way, by the way, to what you mentioned in the go-to-market engineer, which I think is maybe the epitome of that role, right? It's not a RevOps, it's not an SDR, but it is someone who knows how to build those tools. And I think it's being like technical savvy, right? That's what you want at the end. And that's a culmination of many different, I would say, minor skill set that ultimately is being aggregating into having that person who knows how to build those things. And I think it's fascinating to see that shift. By the way, taking a step back and talking about ops in general, not necessarily from an AI perspective, you can see a transformation within the space to go from strategy ops and all the way to RevOps. And I think strategy ops obviously depends on some of the maturity of the organization and the size, but generally speaking, you can see the divergence in terms of strategy ops are more focused on what used to be strategy or what used to be RevOps, which is how the organization is operating towards its goals and OKRs. And you have RevOps, which is the more of how you're building the micro processes, the micro engagements, the optimizations. And that's exactly what you talked about, the go-to-market engineers or the more of a technical skill set. So I see not only the creation of roles such as a go-to-market engineer, but the divergence within ops organization into those two spectrums in which every single one of them requires a different skill set. So it's very interesting to see how those things are developed and how the market basically reacts to the emergence of AI tooling. So I think it really puts everything, the spotlight is how companies are essentially behaving or how companies are optimizing their own, headcount and their own internal processes in order to accommodate for the different skill set that they now require in terms of their go-to-market organizations.
Yeah, it makes sense. So it sounds like you guys don't have necessarily that specific role in your organization. And who's then in charge of building out these workflows? Is it basically somebody who was more on the RevOps side and who, as you said, was more of an analyst?
I wish I had a single answer. I do have examples about people who build things, but I think the way that you want to structure the organization is to democratize the way to build workflows within the guardrails. So for Yotpo, for example, we have the RevOps individuals mostly the managers, not necessarily the analysts, who are building the majority of the workflows, of the automations and the processes. Just because they understand the problem sphere. Like, they know exactly what's not working and they know exactly what's needed, like an ideal state to solve it. So I think that's part of ultimately who's going to take action. They're being empowered to do so. We know with Clay, with the tooling, with 898 or Relevance, what have you, the workshops that we're doing, the investments that we're doing in getting people from outside the company to actually work with RevOps to make sure that we're bridging any gap in knowledge that we have. But you will still see people from our BA or IT or people from actual operators across the different organizations that are building things on their own. So it's really unique in the sense that in this new world, almost everybody can build something if they have the right access to the information to the data. But the vast majority of processes, like, let's be honest, the vast majority of processes and workflows are being built by ops managers. But we do see some SDRs or SDR leaders or AEs that have a very intimate understanding of how to reach out to someone. And if they're the technical savvy, they're able to build very cool processes, whether it's identifying from their territory who they need to reach out to and how to reach out to with tools they've built over Lovable, some offering or some hooks that they're building. But one of the things that happened at Yotpo is we had an AE who used to be like an SDR manager who built an entire, truthfully cutting edge outbound flow just without even needing Yotpo guardrails. So he built it off of, and we can say about why this is like a negative, by the way, but he built it off of Gong and off of Salesforce. So ultimately it was very hard to take it as part of kind of the Yotpo tech stack. But if you think about what he was managed to build, that's a really cutting edge tool that's ultimately has brought a ton of value for the company.
Super cool. So if I summarize what you just said, you don't necessarily have a specific function that's a GTM engineer, but the folks that at least are currently carrying this on are folks that are just traditionally on the RevOps side that are typically managers. You said also maybe like BDR manager, as well as ad hoc folks who like building the systems, being in the systems, who could be a sales guy or an SDR, but it's not a specific title that's like a GTM engineer or something like that. That makes sense, and that's what I'm seeing too. The title GTM engineer is still very fresh, and right now I'm seeing that a lot of RevOps managers are the ones that are taking the lead on building that, or SDR manager for all the outbound automation stuff.
I'd love to add one more point. I think the change is very much accelerated by everything new that's being built and what's added. But I think GTM engineer is already, in some sense, a notion of the past. So it used to have the emergence of AI tools, and you said, oh, we need someone who's very much an expert building things within AI, probably to solve one problem within the organization. It used to be outbounding, right? So you bring in and go-to-market engineer, they would be your outbound motion and so on and so forth. But I think what we've discovered across the last couple of years is that in order to empower someone like a go-to-market engineer, you need to build many different tools, or you need to buy many different tools to get this into fruition. And by doing so, you're missing out on a ton of other, maybe even more important in terms of net impact or different problems that you have within the organization that not only, but for the most part, RevOps managers are the one who are actually interacting with those problems on a daily basis. And by allowing them to work off with those tools, probably you would get more ROI on any tools that you would get, or any process you would build. So in a way, I think we've shifted from having a singular point in which they work with AI, they're solving the problems with AI, into how can we integrate AI with everyone across the different teams and the different structure that we have across the go-to-market. I think the biggest point to take out of this, and I think you positioned it very well, is there's a true risk of underinvesting with AI. And I think what we've realized for the past 2 years is that investing isn't enough. You need to fix the fundamental problems that you have with your data, with your processes, to make sure that AI can work and you can get off much more returns from AI. And then B, that there's many different problems and many different problem sets that a single person won't be able to solve, but you need to optimize the organization. You need to incorporate AI with pretty much everything that you do. And that's the way to unlock that revenue, or the way to unlock that impact, is with enabling your ops managers. And when you think about, again, ops managers, we touched about it. Those usually are people that are tech savvy. They know the processes. They know how to handle new tools and information. And usually with enabling them, you would find that they are able to solve many different problems across your organization that you used to just mistreat, or you had some, I would say, almost like a market failure. Nobody cared too much of slight manual processes, but at the end, when it's aggregating, it's extremely important for the organization. And I think that's pretty much the shift that we've went from go-to-market engineer like a year and a half ago into, okay, we need a more AI-driven ops organization to solve many of the problems that we have, including those that used to be solved with go-to-market engineers. So that's my take on where we are in the hiring skill set kind of management. So I think that's what you would see more and more, is that you have more tech-savvy operation managers versus those glorified go-to-market engineers. But I could be wrong. Obviously,
that makes sense.
we'll wait.
Makes sense. Great perspective. So Yuval, I'm curious to hear about some of the initiatives you guys have going on internally. Like, what are some of the big projects you guys are working on that you might be building? And also would love to hear about maybe existing processes that you guys have already built, maybe that you can share a little bit about. That's always eye-opening to see how people are thinking and what they're actually building.
No, 100%. First, I would say everything that I would show it was built by the smart individuals across my team. And so I will start off with the biggest challenge we're trying to solve, and then I will go through some of the more tactical ones. And I think I'll try to do it in the sense of high code, low code, no code, in terms of just make sure that I'm not only presenting like the strategy, but I want to tie it back to what's happening in reality. So let's start with, again, this is just, strategy, very high level with our high code team. So basically what we're trying to do, and something that I think many organizations face, is optimizing CSM time. When you think about, obviously, CSM, very, very high, very costly resource. You try to make sure that you don't scale your customers and you scale your CSMs at the same rate, because otherwise the margins becomes troublesome. And so what we're doing we have Jonathan Cohen, who's leading our AI operations within the ops role within Yotpo. He and his developers are working on a way to go over all of the CSM's emails, to map out them to different categories, and then to build different processes in which once you get that email that you mapped for, you would be able to act upon it without the need of an actual CSM work, ultimately hoping to lead to a much higher ratio between CSMs and their book of business in their accounts. And why this is a high code, why this is a hard problem, by the way, is because think about the need to compress so much information into a tokenized version of an input for an AI. And so you need to do a lot of work in terms of labeling, how to work with the LLMs in order to take a partial piece of information, compare it with essentially everything that you have across the organization, across the email sets, which is enormous amounts of data. And without taking really the time to label this correctly, to integrate LLMs within the process of getting email, comparing it with what we have across all of the emails across the organization, all of the Gong meetings, Gong calls, and ultimately support cases and so on, it's a very hard problem to solve from a technical standpoint. And so that team has been working for a few months there, and you can already see them mapping 4 or 5 different categories in which CSMs receiving emails, and they're already working on solving any support question that someone asks. So imagine a world where CSM, that they don't even have to answer. Do they need to check how the LLM kind of responded, and saving hours on end in order to make sure that they're more efficient, that they can focus on providing more value to our customers. And I think this is one of the biggest initiatives and the most interesting project that the team has been working on. And I think that the impact would be according, right? Big problem, big impact. So that's on the high code level of things and what they're building. When you think about the low code, that's where I think there's much more tactical project that we're doing. And one of them that I would love to take you through is a problem that we faced across the organization. I think many of the organizations probably are facing is the ability to learn about parent-child account mapping. And within Yotpo, we have, as one of our most important muscles, our ability to penetrate or to cross-sell and upsell our upmarket accounts. And obviously in the e-commerce space, especially in the last few years, there's been a trend of consolidation across e-commerce brands working with one unified parent account. And our ability to upsell and to cross-sell those accounts essentially involve the need to understand who is working with the parent account, that the parent account relationship is already set, and then making sure that we're taking this information and we're arming our account managers with this information in order for them to take on the actions. And I would say for the past 3-4 years, we've tried many different things, which involve every month we got a data dump from Zoom Info, for example, and we try to match it within the organization. We try to go one by one with individuals or an offshore team. And then just a few weeks ago, someone on the team actually built a process using 8n8 that takes on the information, leveraging all of the identifiers from domain and contacts and emails, matching it with obviously public records, with Clay, with 8n8, and just returning that connection. So I would love to show you how it looks like.
Sounds great. I think this is the type of stuff that for many people would be extremely dry, but it's such a great example because I've suffered through this, for many years for similar reasons, right? Parent-child, because of conglomerates that have a lot of different accounts, even for AE mapping, right? To be able to identify who owns what. You mentioned for upsell, of course, that's key. And all sorts of rules that need to be taken into consideration. And so the fact that you guys are using N8N to be able to basically map this out makes sense. So it's using N8N. What's your CRM, by the way?
So we're using Salesforce. We just introduced Clay, but not fully integrated at this point. We're trying to make the adjustments to make sure it works perfectly.
So then the data is going out of Salesforce into N8N. N8N is basically
I think I can show it to you. I think it will make...
Go ahead. I'm excited to hear more.
It will make much more sense. Essentially, it involves working from Salesforce, getting the information into Google Sheets, getting all the accounts there. And then basically we're trying to check for parent-child accounts using ChatGPT, which usually is involving a lot of public records. Then obviously there's some code that kind of either checks the type of relationship, if it's really a parent account, it's a kind of a sister account, whether or not it used to be. So there's a lot of questions that you need to ask and you need to filter the data correctly. Ultimately then powers N8N to merge the accounts within Salesforce. To merge, obviously there's some tactical components to it, right? So you have the context, you have the opportunities, you have the contracts. There's many different things that go into it. And then you would act upon the merge, ultimately loop it in again to make sure that you want to have the right data within. And then you would do two things. You would power the Google Sheets. It would ultimately power Salesforce and will provide the information for ops managers. We talked about the governance. This is also a key part of making sure that we're on top of everything that's happening. And then ultimately reaching Salesforce again with this information, sending an email or sending a note to the account manager so they can have the right type of information. So it involves working with different systems. The main things that I have to say is the ability to unleash ChatGPT to work with the different inputs. The second piece that I think is important to highlight is the fact that we need to governance this, especially at this point. Again, we talked about this in depth a few minutes ago. And so we're still holding the information before we're doing many of the things within some Google Sheets, just to have almost like a quality check. And then to run this through Salesforce, make the changes, notify the different personas. So this is really something that's, again, as you can see, it's like very basic. It involves things that are off the shelf, nothing too fancy, but it solves a problem that for 3.5 years we managed to solve within a few hours of work. So I think that's really where the value and the ability to take leverage of AI is actually happening. And I'd love to take you through another thing that a guy named Jamie across our team from the UK has built, which involves an SDR outbound, which again I think is one of those key areas when people think about AI. So you can see this basically. And I think one of the things that I'll take a step back. One of the most challenging things is to build a true outbound emotion leveraging AI. It's usually the first thing that comes into mind when you think about AI, but the amount of work that goes into this is extraordinary. So think about basically for an outbound motion, you need to have the right time. You need to have the right context, as everything has to be clean and everything has to be associated with what you're trying to achieve, right? The role and title. You need to have the proper intent signals in order to make sure you're not only cold calling them, and then you have to take all of those insights. You have to enrich them with the right information because you're sending it at the right time. And then you need to send something to them. How are you sending this? How are you doing this? Whether or not it's via LinkedIn, via Gong Engage, just emails. There's a whole range of deliverability issues that are associated with this. And then on top is how are you sending this to them? What are you trying to get? So there's like a strategy issue and then a tactical AI issue. So again, Jamie from the UK, which is doing something very unique, managed to build basically with a wide range of tools to build the process that involved all of those things. So he's building his own TAM based on the source of information that we have, enriching it with different tools just off the get-go, just to create the list that he's targeting. And obviously he needs Salesforce as well to make sure that he's not reaching out to contacts that are in sales cycle, right? Or has been churned for the last 3 months. So there's many micro decisions that you have to make in each one of those stages. And then obviously you're building the contact list, you need LinkedIn, or you need other tools basically to provide you with this information. And then there's another question or another junction is whether or not you're just out cold calling or cold outreaching those individuals, or you're waiting for some insights, right? So insights can be whether or not 6 Sense Insights, which I know a lot of people are using, or LinkedIn Insights, or Swan AI, which is another tool that will allows you to see any actions that people have taken either in the dark funnel, so search for Yotpo outside of our website, or search for different keywords or different topics that would help us to make sure that they're warm and they would like to be in a sales cycle right now. And then once you have this, basically, you're really going through an enrichment process in order to make sure that you have the most updated data and you want to send it to the right individual because, again, click-through rates, open rates, ultimately will determine the success of this operation. And then there's another range of external enrichment. And obviously there's like a first party and third party data. So this would be the third party data that you're going to get from different tools, anything that's publicly available or internal data. So again, here comes the notes from the sellers, the transcript from Gong, the information that we have, the opportunity data that we have. So again, a wide range of first party data. And then ultimately you make a decision how you want to approach this. So we at Yotpo, we thought about different ways to do this is either by sending them a campaign in which we're trying to just ask them we're trying to do something for them, right? We're either sending them something, we're doing a mock for them. I don't necessarily want to just do something very salesy off the top. We're leveraging different campaigns that we have, different mock-ups, different ads. And then once we've decided, and again, think about it, every campaign, every mock-up, everything is also being determined by the LLMs. So it's not like Jamie or someone else across the team is sitting, getting the information at this point and saying, a charge from this company is looking for reviews product. But okay, based on their title, based on their tenure, based on the information that we got from public sourced databases, we make a decision what they should see and how should they see it and what's the context. And then we make a decision how we want to go about it, right? Do we just want to send something that's more of an ads perspective? Do we want to do a cold outreach or a warmish outreach with leaders across the Yotpo organization? We just want to send something from the SDL. And again, those are decisions that AI is making through the process. And ultimately, there's the tools to send the leads, either it's Smart Lead or Gong or whatever the team is working with. And how are you actually want to send some of the things? So think about the mockups, we're rolling them through Lovable. How are you actually integrating ads? You're using Influ too. So I think, again, I've went on for 5 minutes talking about this, but just one thing that, I think the listeners, and I think everybody's working in ops needs to be conscious about is just how many micro decisions, how many tools are being leveraged. So you talked about go-to-market engineer. This is essentially what a go-to-market engineer would be very good at. So this is, I think, unlike what I just said about democratizing AI, this area involves a much, much heavier understanding of how things are being built, what the tech stack looks like, and what's the outcome. This is not something you can do by passing. This is, a quarter or 6 months project, essentially. And so we were fortunate to have Jamie across our team to build this. But I think it's just what I'm trying to take you and to take everyone who will listen to this is just the amount of work and the amount of decision and tactical decision you have to make in order to really leverage AI. But ultimately, every junction here, some form of decision and work that either SDRs used to do in the past or ops individual used to do in the past. And here you can have one single process which takes you through the fundamentals of operations, which are enrichment, signal identification. Obviously, in the back, you have territories and TAM and ICP, all the way to outreach, tracking, and ultimately understanding the revenue for the organization. So I really think this is a pivotal moment, basically, in the way that we're leveraging AI. But I want to be conscious about A, how difficult it is to build. B, we've talked about this. It's hard to scale AI without having the right fundamentals. So if the data doesn't work, if your data within Salesforce is not good, it's not well structured, you have no idea who's in sales cycle, you have no idea what the contacts are, and the majority of them aren't working at the same companies, and so on and so forth, then this will be very, very difficult and very challenging to do. So it's not only about building it now and running as fast as you can, it's really about scaling the existing process that you have. And once, I think a lot of organizations need to focus there at the beginning. And then obviously there's like the saying garbage in, garbage out, which I think for a reason, it's a phrase that's being, I think, uttered again and again by ops individuals. Once you solve those, or once you get into at least 80%, 85%, that's where type of project, which I just showed you, really is accelerated, really comes into play. So I think that's the world of high code.
Super interesting.
I would say that's like a combination of high code and probably mid code or low code to that extent. And all the way, just lastly, is about a lot of custom GPTs that folks across the organization build, whether as marketers that need a list from HubSpot and they can ask some of the questions using a custom GPT, or again, creating butter cards when sellers are going up one competitor and they can go through a custom GPT with the information that's being already populated by our PMM. So there's many projects, there's so many ways to go about it, and this is something that maybe to conclude in a way, but you need to determine where the organization is going, what type of problems you want to solve, and who's the right people to solve them. And I think that two-vector framework really enables you to think strategically about how to do those things. So I think just to summarize, that's where as an organization and as operators, you need to be mindful of it, or to think and to solve initially before running and doing a ton of work without understanding exactly what you're trying to solve.
Makes a lot of sense. And this was really an eye-opening workflow. I have to say, I don't think I've seen a workflow that's this sophisticated. So I was thinking there were so many things going in the back of my mind in terms of how is he pulling that data? How do we it's when you said it's a quarter or more of work, I can definitely see that. I mean, it starts with one branch and one, workflow, and then you bolt on, and then you want to add this and add, it's like brick by brick. But every time it becomes more sophisticated. And in a way, you have to have a sandbox to try and make sure it works well. And you're pulling in more data, and that might disrupt the model. Can I just go back a step? This guy you said, is he on the SDR team or is he on the RevOps team?
So he basically now he's managing the project almost full time. Just for the listener to understand kind of the magnitude of the problem. But he used to be an AE. He's very tech savvy, obviously very smart. And I think he understands the power of AI. And he, as you said, sat around night overnight, build it. And obviously, I don't think you need to have a very, and as I said, intimate understanding of how even buyers are buying products, right? Otherwise, it's just like a mess of tools. But he developed a strategy about sending mockups, making a decision on the right campaigns. How are you even making a decision, right? Maybe, Charles, you've opened these type of emails before, right? And this information kind of lives within Clay. And, your click-through rate is much higher than others. So you would get this instead of getting that. And ultimately, that personalization is extremely meaningful. When people say personalization, usually in the SDR world, they think an SDR reading through LinkedIn and so, you live in New York. I don't think that's going to cut it anymore. So that's like an extremely interesting, I would say, project that this person built. It's almost as a product on its own merit, to be honest.
And the reason I was also asking what team he was part of is because what's interesting in that workflow is I would, if you told me asked me who built this, I would say
an engineer,
somebody who has a global understanding also of the sales and marketing and go-to-market organization. That person understands, he's bringing in partnerships, he's bringing in events, he's bringing in things from Gong, things from Salesforce, things from Swan AI, things you need to even understand, he's bringing in ads, you need to even have a really good global understanding of how the go-to-market engine is running to be able to orchestrate such a beautiful workflow.
It's an amazing point. And why is this an amazing point about us? Because usually in the past, coming from an SDR background or seller background, trying to make the transition into ops was a disadvantage, right? Now it's an advantage because with the AI tools, essentially you can build so many things And by a very good understanding of the problem, you maybe would end up getting to a better place than what someone who used to do a lot of like non-operating work used to do. So I think a way of thinking about kind of the skill set and where we're going with this soul of the RevOps role.
Totally. Yeah, it's super interesting. This was a great example. Thank you for sharing. And I'm applauding virtually Jamie, who's done a great job.
Yes.
And I loved how at the end he has future kind of ideas, and he already has a bunch of different things. And I'm sure if I have you back on the show in 6 months, it's going to be a Frankenstein. There's going to be
that's the way I call it. Frankenstein, definitely a beast.
A beast. Exactly. Amazing. This is really cool. Listen, Yuval, I really appreciate the time you took to lay out how you think about all this, how you guys are implementing AI within Yotpo, and give examples of things that you guys have built internally. Again, you've been doing this for a long time, and you're clearly implementing a lot of the cutting edge strategies yourself. How can folks find you? Is it the best way to find you on LinkedIn?
The best way is probably via LinkedIn. I'd love for people to listen to this, to DM me. We can talk, we can nerd, AI or ops as much as they want.
Amazing. So I'll add your LinkedIn URL to the show notes. And again, Yuval, thank you so much for your time. This was a really insightful conversation. And maybe we'll have you back on the pod in 6 months to explore some of the new things that you guys are building.
Everything will change, Ben, by then.
Exactly.
All right.
Thank you so much, Yuval. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much.